Draw a map of your entire life, every moment, every place, all of it, inside the fabric of space-time. Now look at what surrounds it. You might assume the rest of the map is simply your past and your future. It is not. The overwhelming majority of reality is a third region, marked out by the physics of Hermann Minkowski more than a century ago, where events are happening right now and are also permanently sealed away from you. You cannot affect them. They cannot affect you. Not with a message, not with a force, not even with a beam of light given all the time in the universe. And here is the part that should unsettle you. In that region, the word now has no fixed meaning at all. Whether an event there lies in your past, your present, or your future is not a fact about the universe. It depends on how fast you happen to be walking. This is the absolute elsewhere. By the end, you will understand what the light cone really is, and why it cuts reality into three. Why the now you trust so completely dissolves the moment you look far enough away. What the block universe and quantum entanglement do and do not prove about time, fate, and the self. And why this silent, unreachable region may point to something standing entirely outside it. Keep one question in mind as we go. If no observer anywhere can hold all of reality in a single present, who can? If you find value in explorations like this, in following the puzzles that keep physicists awake at night, consider subscribing to the channel, which helps these deep dives reach more curious minds. Now, let us begin. Start with the picture of time you have carried your whole life, the one so obvious it has never once needed defending. Reality, you assume, is divided into two parts by a single moving line. Behind the line lies the past, fixed, finished, gone. Ahead of it lies the future, open, unwritten, not yet arrived. And the line itself is the present, the now, the thin, bright edge where the future is constantly turning into the past. Most importantly, you assume this line is shared. Your now and the now of a friend across the city, of a probe across the solar system, of a star across the galaxy. All of it, you imagine, is the same universal instant, one cosmic present sweeping forward together for everything that exists. This picture is so deeply built into human thought that for most of history, no one suspected there could be an alternative. And then, in the early 20th century, physics looked closely at light, and the single shared line shattered into something far stranger. It turned out that reality is not divided into two regions by a moving present. It is divided into three. And the third region, the largest by far, the one with no name in ordinary language, is the subject of this exploration. To understand it, we begin where it began, with the discovery that the speed of light is the same for everyone. In 1905, Albert Einstein built his special theory of relativity on a single strange postulate. The speed of light in empty space is invariant. It is exactly 299,792,4 458 meters per second, about 186,282 miles per second. And it is the same for every observer in steady motion, no matter how fast they themselves are moving, toward the light or away from it. You cannot catch light. You cannot outrun it. It always recedes from you at that same fixed speed. This is not a statement about lamps and beams. It is a statement about the architecture of cause and effect itself, because the speed of light is also the speed limit of the universe, the fastest that any signal, any force, any influence of any kind can travel from one place to another. Nothing carrying information outruns light. And once you fix that limit, you have quietly fixed the entire structure of what can affect what. There is a subtlety here that changes how you should hear the phrase, the speed of light, and it is essential to the entire idea of the elsewhere. That invariant speed is not, at bottom, a fact about light. It is a fact about cause and effect. It is the maximum rate at which any influence, any push, any signal, any consequence can travel from one event to another. The universe's absolute ceiling on how fast the future can be reached from the present. Light happens to travel at exactly this speed because light is massless, and massless things move at the ceiling. But if light had never existed, the limit would be the same, because the limit
is about causation, not photons. Physicists sometimes say it would be less misleading to call c the speed of causality. The light cone, then, is not really a cone of light. It is a cone of consequence. Its surface is the frontier of everything an event could possibly affect or be affected by. And the elsewhere is everything walled off from that frontier. Not because no lamp shines there, but because no cause can reach it, and no cause within it can reach you. This is why the third region is so much more than an optical curiosity, and why no future technology will ever shrink it. People sometimes imagine that the elsewhere is simply a matter of light being slow, and that a faster signal, some clever beam, some quantum trick, might one day breach it. But the speed limit is not a limit on our engineering. It is woven into the structure of cause and effect itself. To send an influence into your absolute elsewhere, you would not need a better transmitter. You would need to break the order of causation, to let an effect occur before any cause could reach it, which, as we will see, is the same as letting effects precede their causes for some observers. And the universe protects against that with everything it has. The elsewhere is sealed not by the weakness of our messengers, but by the deepest consistency requirement in physics. Keep that in mind, because when we reach the quantum strangeness later, the temptation to think the seal has finally been broken will be enormous, and the resolution will turn on exactly this point. The boundary of the cone is the boundary of causation, and causation is the one thing the cosmos will not allow to be scrambled. 3 years later, a mathematician gave that structure its shape. On the 21st of September 1908, before an assembly of German scientists and physicians in Cologne, Hermann Minkowski delivered a lecture titled Raum und Zeit, Space and Time. It was published the following year, in 1909, shortly after Minkowski died suddenly on the 12th of January at the age of 44. The lecture opened with one of the most quoted sentences in the history of physics. "Space by itself and time by itself," Minkowski declared, "are doomed to sink completely into mere shadows, and only a kind of union of the two preserves an independent reality." This was not poetry detached from mathematics. It was the headline of a precise geometric claim, that events should be treated not as happenings in a separately given space at a separately given time, but as single points in a four-dimensional world. Minkowski gave these points a name. He called each one a world point, and the complete path of any object through the four-dimensional world he called its world line. Your entire life, from first breath to last, is a single world line threaded through this four-dimensional fabric. It is worth pausing on the lecture itself, and on a point of honesty about its language, because it tells us something about how ideas get their names. Minkowski's text does not actually contain the now famous English phrase, "absolute elsewhere." His own words were geometric and German. He spoke of the forward and backward cones at a world point, the Nachkegel and the Vorkegel, the aft cone and the fore cone. He called the region bounded by the past cone the region lying on this side of the event, and the region bounded by the future cone the region lying beyond it. And he described the third region simply and precisely as the part lying between the forecone and the aft cone. The crisp modern label, the absolute elsewhere, is a later expository coinage, attached by physicists and writers in the decades that followed to name the invariant region Minkowski had drawn. This matters not as pedantry, but as a guard against a common confusion. The phrase sounds almost mystical, as if it named a place. What Minkowski actually built was a piece of pure geometry, an invariant classification of how any event stands, causally, to any other. The mysticism, where it creeps in, is added afterward. The structure is exact, and it is his. What Minkowski supplied, and what he did not, is itself a question historians have weighed. The physicist Thibaut Damour, examining the Cologne lecture a century later, situated it inside a triangle of figures. Henri Poincaré, who had already glimpsed parts of the four-dimensional formalism, Albert Einstein, who had supplied the physical kinematics in 1905, and Minkowski, who fused them into a geometry of space-time. Minkowski's distinctive achievement was not the relativity of simultaneity itself, which was Einstein's, but the realization that all of it, time dilation, length contraction, the failure of distant simultaneity, falls out automatically once you treat the world as a four-dimensional manifold with an invariant interval and an invariant cone. He took a set of surprising physical results and showed they were the shadows, on space and on time separately, of a single rigid geometric object. That is why his opening line about space and time sinking into shadows is not decoration. It is the literal thesis. The world point and the world line were his tools for saying, stop thinking of objects moving through space as time flows, and start thinking of fixed curves in a four-dimensional whole. Once you make that shift, the three regions are not an interpretation. They are simply there, carved by the cone, waiting to be read. Now we can build the third region, and it is worth doing carefully because everything that follows depends on it. Pick any event at all. Call it O, a flash, a heartbeat, a single here and now. From that event, imagine every possible path that light could take, spreading outward in all directions of space as time goes forward. Because light moves at a fixed speed, these paths trace out a precise shape, a cone, opening into the future, widening as time advances. Minkowski called this forward-opening shape the aft cone. Imagine the same thing in reverse. Every path by which light could have arrived at the event from the past. And you get a second cone, opening downward into the past. Minkowski called it the fore-cone. Together, they form what we now call the light cone of the event. Two cones meeting at a single point, the event itself. This double cone divides all of reality into three, and the division is the heart of the matter. Everything inside the past cone is the set of events that could have sent a signal to O, that could have influenced it, caused it, reached it at or below the speed of light. This is the absolute past of the event. Everything inside the future cone is the set of events that O can still reach, still influence, still send a signal to. This is the absolute future. And then there is everything else, the entire vast region outside both cones, neither able to reach O nor to be reached by it. Minkowski, in his lecture, described the past cone's region as lying on this side of the event, and the future cone's region as lying beyond it, and the third region simply as everything between the fore-cone and the aft cone. That third region, the part between the cones, is what modern physics calls the elsewhere, or, in its fuller name, the absolute elsewhere. What does it mean that the universe sorts every event into one of these three bins relative to you, here, now? It means that the simple line dividing past from future was always an illusion of small distances and slow speeds. Up close, the elsewhere is vanishingly thin and easy to miss. But it is always there, and as distance grows, it does not stay thin. It opens up to swallow almost everything. Let us make this precise, because the precision is where the strangeness lives. The tool that sorts events into the three regions is a single quantity, the most important number in all of relativity, called the space-time interval. For two events separated by a time delta t and by distances delta x, delta y, and delta z in the three directions of space, the interval is given by this equation: s squared equals c squared times delta t squared minus delta x squared minus delta y squared minus delta z squared. In words, take the time between the two events, multiply by the speed of light, and square it. Then subtract the squares of the separations in space. The remarkable fact, the fact on which the whole geometry stands, is that this quantity, the interval, is the same for every observer in steady motion, no matter how they are moving. They will disagree about the time between the events. They will disagree about the distance. But the particular combination encoded in the interval comes out identical for all of them. And the sign of that interval is what assigns an event to its region. If s squared is positive, if the time part wins, c squared delta t squared greater than the spatial part, the two events are called time-like separated. They lie inside each other's light cones in the absolute past or the absolute future. A clock or a slower-than-light traveller can journey from one to the other. A signal can pass between them. If s squared is exactly 0, the events are light-like or null. They lie precisely on the cone, connected only by a beam of light itself, travelling at exactly c with not a fraction to spare. And if s squared is negative, if the spatial part wins, the distance too great for the time available, the events are space-like separated. They lie outside each other's cones. They lie in the elsewhere. The absolute elsewhere of an event is exactly this: the set of all events whose interval from it is negative. The set of all events for which the distance between them, in light travel terms, is greater than the time, so that even light, the fastest thing there is, cannot bridge the gap. It helps to see the cone as a real shape rather than a diagram, because in the full 3 dimensions of space it is more beautiful and more severe than the flat drawings suggest. Fix the event O at an instant. A flash of light leaves it and races outward in every direction at once, and at each later moment that light forms an expanding sphere, a thin shell of brightness whose radius grows at exactly the speed of light, so that after a time t, the sphere has radius r equal to c times t. Stack those growing spheres, one for every instant, and their surfaces sweep out the future light cone. Not a simple triangle, but a 4-dimensional surface, whose cross-section at any moment is a sphere of radius c times the elapsed time. Run the same picture backward, and the incoming light forms the past cone. The boundary between reachable and unreachable is therefore not an abstraction. It is the literal frontier of an expanding bubble of light, and the condition for an event to lie in the absolute elsewhere, that its distance r exceeds c times the available time t, is just the statement that the event sits outside every light bubble O could ever emit. Even light, the swiftest courier in existence, arrives at the boundary and finds the event already beyond it. This is why the elsewhere deserves the word absolute, and it brings us to the property that makes the whole structure trustworthy. The classification does not depend on who is looking. One might worry that all this talk of cones is an artifact of one particular observer's viewpoint, and that someone moving differently would draw the cones at a different tilt and sort the events differently. They would not. The transformations of relativity that carry one inertial observer's measurements into another's, the Lorentz transformations, are precisely, by their mathematical definition, the transformations that leave the interval unchanged. In the compact language of matrices, they satisfy the condition that the transformation, applied to the metric and transformed back, returns the same metric. Lambda transpose eta lambda equals eta. Because they preserve the interval, they preserve its sign. And because they preserve its sign, they preserve the three classes exactly. The surface where s squared equals 0, the cone itself, maps onto itself under every allowed change of motion. No boost, however violent, can tilt an event from inside the cone to outside it, or lift an event out of your absolute elsewhere and set it down inside your reachable future. The walls of the cone are not painted on by perspective, they are welded into the geometry, identical for every observer in the cosmos. What does it mean that the one feature everyone agrees on is the division between what can be touched and what cannot? It means causality. The bare structure of what can affect what is the most objective thing in the universe. More objective than length, more objective than duration, more objective than the order of distant events. Hold that thought. It is going to matter enormously. There is a further analogy worth keeping, because it captures the loneliness of the situation. Imagine you could send out messengers in every direction at the maximum speed the universe allows, and that every other event could do the same toward you. Your absolute future is the set of all places your fastest messenger can still reach. Your absolute past is the set of all events whose fastest messenger has already arrived. The elsewhere is everything your messengers will never reach in time, and whose messengers will never reach you. Not because anyone is too slow, but because the geometry of spacetime has placed those events on the far side of a frontier that moves at the very speed your messengers travel. You are not losing a race. The finish line is receding at exactly your top speed, and it always will. That is the absolute elsewhere. Not a distance you might someday cross with a faster ship, but a permanent severance written into the shape of reality. Here is a concrete way to feel it. Use units where distance is measured in light years and time in years, so that light travels exactly 1 light year per year. Take our event O at the origin. Now consider an event A that happens 1 year later in time, but 3 light years away in space. Its interval is 1 squared minus 3 squared, 1 minus 9, which is -8. Negative. Event A is in the absolute elsewhere of O. And you can see why immediately. A is 3 light years away, but only 1 year has passed. For light to reach A from O, it would need 3 years, and it has only 1. The gap cannot be closed. Whatever happens at O, a discovery, a decision, a catastrophe, cannot touch A. And whatever happens at A cannot touch O, no matter what. They are real events in the same universe, and they are causally sealed away from each other completely. Contrast that with an event C that happens 3 years later and only 1 light year away.
Its interval is 3 squared minus 1 squared, 9 minus 1, positive 8. Positive. Event C is time-like separated, sitting comfortably inside the future cone of O. A signal launched from O at less than light speed has 3 years to cross a single light year, an easy journey. O can reach C. C is part of O's absolute future. The only difference between A and C is the balance between distance and time. And that balance is everything. It is the difference between a region you can shape and a region forever beyond your reach. Think about what the elsewhere actually is in human terms, because the mathematics can hide the vertigo. Picture an enormous building with infinitely many rooms, and you are standing in one of them. The rooms of your past are the ones whose messages have already reached you, slipped under your door. The rooms of your future are the ones your own messages can still reach if you send them now. But surrounding you, vastly outnumbering both, are rooms whose doors are sealed in a way no key can open. Rooms close enough to exist, real and occupied and full of events, yet so arranged that no message you send will ever arrive, and no message they send will ever reach you. You know they are there. You can even calculate exactly where they are. You simply cannot, under any circumstance, touch them or be touched by them. That is the absolute elsewhere, and at this very moment, it contains very nearly the entire universe. Everything beyond a certain horizon of nearness, almost every star, every galaxy, every event unfolding across the cosmos right now, sits in your elsewhere. It is worth dwelling on just how much of reality this region claims, because the honest answer rearranges your sense of your own place in the universe. The size of the elsewhere is not fixed. It grows with distance, and it grows without mercy. For events very close to you, across the room, across the street, the elsewhere is razor thin, a sliver so small that the disagreement about when amounts to billionths of a second, far below anything you could ever notice. This is why the universal shared now feels so secure in daily life. At human scale, the third region is too narrow to see. But push outward and it yawns open. The relativity of simultaneity makes the disagreement about distant events scale with their distance, so that the farther away an event is, the larger the band of time over which different observers cannot agree whether it is past, present, or future. By the time you reach the nearer planets, the band is seconds wide. By the time you reach the center of our own galaxy, tens of thousands of light years away, ordinary differences in motion smear the distant now across years. And reaching another galaxy, as we will see, a casual walk is enough to shift it by days. The elsewhere is not a remote curiosity at the edge of physics. It begins a hair's breadth from your skin and swallows essentially the entire cosmos. Hold the image of your own life as Minkowski would have you hold it. A single thin world line threading from your birth to your
death through the four-dimensional fabric. Along that line, at every point, sits a light cone, and the overwhelming bulk of space-time lies outside it, in your elsewhere. Stretch your arm toward the night sky, and you point at 100 billion galaxies, almost every one of which is, at this instant, in your absolute elsewhere. Real, populated with events, running its own history forward, and utterly unreachable by you, and unreachable to you, with no fact of the matter about whether what is happening there is happening now. You are not a citizen of a universe you share a present with. You are a narrow world line moving through an ocean of the causally sealed, permitted to touch only the thin wake of cones that follows and precedes you. Almost everything that exists in your elsewhere. What does it mean that the universe you belong to is, from your vantage and from every vantage, overwhelmingly a place you can never reach and never know in the present tense? At the very least, it means our intuitive picture, one cosmic stage, one ticking clock, everyone sharing the same passing instant, was never a description of this universe. It was a description of the cramped human neighborhood where the elsewhere is too thin to notice. There is one more piece to lay down before the strangeness fully arrives, and it concerns what stays fixed and what does not. The sorting of events into the three classes, time-like, null, space-like, is itself absolute. Every observer, however they are moving, agrees on it. If two events are space-like separated for you, they are space-like separated for everyone. The reason is mathematical. The transformations that relate one observer's measurements to another's, the Lorentz transformations of relativity, are precisely the ones that leave the interval unchanged, and so they preserve the light cone exactly. No change of motion can tilt an event from inside the cone to outside it, or carry an event out of the elsewhere into your reachable future. The walls of the cone are invariant. The three regions are real features of the world, not artifacts of perspective. But, and this is the seed we will let grow in the next part, so hold it carefully, while everyone agrees on which region an event lies in, they do not all agree on something else. They do not agree, for events in the elsewhere, on when those events happen. The causal walls are fixed for everyone. The clock readings inside the elsewhere are not. Two observers, passing the same point at the same instant, moving only slightly differently, will write down different answers to the question, is that distant event happening now, or has it already happened, or is it yet to come? And the astonishing thing is that none of them is wrong. We have built the three regions. We have shown that the elsewhere is the great causally severed majority of reality. Now we have to confront what it does to the most trusted word in your vocabulary, the word now. And the answer is going to require us to ask whether a shared, universal present exists anywhere in the universe at all. To see why the elsewhere dissolves the word now, we need the rule that translates one observer's measurements into another's. In relativity, when an observer moving at speed v relative to you along the x direction measures the time of an event, their clock reading t prime relates to yours by this equation. T prime equals gamma
times the quantity t minus vx over c squared. Here, x is the position of the event in space, c is the speed of light, and gamma is the stretch factor of relativity. Gamma equals 1 over the square root of 1 minus v squared over c squared. For everyday speeds, gamma is almost exactly 1, which is why none of this is visible in ordinary life. But look at the term that does the real damage. The transformed time does not depend only on the original time. It depends also on the position, x, through that term minus vx over c squared. Two events that you judge to happen at the same time but at different places will be assigned different times by the moving observer, because their different positions feed into that term. Simultaneity, the sharing of a single now across a distance, is not preserved when you change your motion. It is frame-dependent. It is personal. Now apply this specifically to the elsewhere and watch what happens, because it is the strangest result in the whole subject. Take that event A again. 1 year in time, 3 light years away, sitting in your absolute elsewhere with an interval of -8. Ask the simple question, when does A happen relative to your now at O? In your own frame, A happens 1 year after O. But consider an observer drifting past you at a gentle 2/10 of the speed of light. Running the numbers through the transformation, that observer assigns A a time of about +4/10 of a year, still later than O, but by less. Now speed the observer up to 1/3 of light speed. At exactly that motion, the calculation gives a transformed time of 0. For that observer, A happens at the very same instant as O. It is there distant now. And now push to 1/2 of light speed. The transformed time flips to negative, about -6/10 of a year. For that observer, A has already happened. It is in their past. Sit with that, because it is not a trick of measurement or a delay in light reaching anyone. It is the structure of reality itself. One single event, A, out in the elsewhere. 3 observers passing the same point at the same moment, differing only in how fast they stroll. For the first, A lies in the future. For the second, A is happening now. For the third, A is already in the past. And there is no fact of the matter that settles which of them is correct, because relativity insists that all inertial observers are equally valid. The event's membership in your elsewhere is absolute. Every one of them agrees A is causally sealed off. But its position in time, its pastness or presentness or futureness, is not a property the event has. It is a property of the observer's motion. The mathematics even tells you exactly the speed at which any space-like event becomes simultaneous with you. V equals c squared times delta t over delta x. Walk at that speed and the distant event snaps to your present. Walk slower, it is in your future. Walk faster, it is in your past. Compare this one more time to a time-like event, to see, inside your future cone, 3 years ahead and 1 light year away. Try the same trick. Speed up your imaginary observer as much as you like in either direction, all the way toward the speed of light.
The transformed time of C never reaches zero. It cannot. C is always later than O for every possible observer, because the time part of its interval dominates the space part, and no allowed change of motion can overcome that. This is the deep reason the relativity of simultaneity does not wreck cause and effect. The order of causally connected events, events that can actually influence each other, is protected, fixed, agreed upon by all. Only in the elsewhere, the region where nothing can influence anything, does temporal order come apart. The universe guards the sequence of causes and effects with absolute strictness, and pays for it by surrendering any universal now that would stretch across the causally disconnected gaps. Minkowski's region between the cones is not an invariant present. It is an invariantly non-causal region with no fixed order in time at all. Let me put hard numbers on the contrast, because they make the divide impossible to wave away. Keep event A out in the elsewhere, 1 year up, 3 light-years over. For an observer moving at 2/10 of light speed, the relativity factor gamma is about 1.02, and A's time comes out to roughly plus 4/10 of a year. Still future, but barely. For an observer at 1/3 of light speed, gamma is about 1.06, and A's time lands exactly on 0, dead present. For an observer at half of light speed, gamma is about 1.15, and A's time falls to roughly minus 6/10 of a year, now firmly in the past. One event, 3 verdicts, and every verdict valid. Then take the time-like event C, 3 years up, 1 light-year over, inside the future cone. Run an observer at half of light speed, and C's time comes out to about plus 2.9 years. Reverse the observer's direction, minus 1/2 of light speed, and C's time comes out to about plus 4.0 years. Try every speed in between, in either direction, and you will never, ever drive C's time to 0, let alone negative. It is plus something always for everyone. The elsewhere event swings freely through past, present, and future like a compass needle near a magnet. The causal event holds rock steady, a fixed star. This is the part that stays with me, more than the dilation of clocks or the contraction of rulers. It is the discipline of it. The universe is not careless with time. It is fanatically careful, but only where carelessness would cause a contradiction. Wherever one event can actually influence another, wherever a cause could reach an effect, the order is locked, identical for every observer who will ever live. Because to scramble that order would let effects precede their causes, and reality would tear. And wherever no influence can pass, out in the elsewhere, across the sealed gaps, the universe relaxes completely, allowing every observer their own answer to what is happening there now. Because no contradiction can arise from events that can never speak to one another. The frame dependence is not sloppiness. It is permitted exactly and only where it is harmless. That is not the behavior of a blur. It is the behavior of a law with a purpose. Protect causation absolutely, and surrender everything else that is not needed to protect it. What does it mean that the cosmos guards the sequence of cause and effect with infinitely more jealousy than it guards the very notion of a shared present? We will come back to that, because it is one of the quietest and most pointed facts in all of physics. The most vivid demonstration of this was made famous by the mathematician Roger Penrose, and it is worth walking through slowly. Consider the Andromeda Galaxy, our great neighbour, roughly 2 million light-years away. Now, picture two people on a sidewalk here on Earth, walking past each other in opposite directions at an ordinary pace, say 4 kilometers an hour, a slow stroll. Both are perfectly ordinary observers. But because Andromeda is so staggeringly far away, that tiny difference in their walking speed, fed through the relativity of simultaneity over 2 million light-years, produces an enormous difference in their distant now. As the philosopher Stephen Savitt lays out the case, the two walkers' planes of simultaneity, sliced through Andromeda, differ by something on the order of 5 3/4 days. Let that land. At the instant the two pedestrians pass each other, one of them has a now at Andromeda that includes events nearly 6 days removed from the other's now at Andromeda. If a fleet were departing from a world in that galaxy, one walker's present could contain the fleet already launched and underway, while the other walker's present, at the very same sidewalk instant, contains a council still in session, the decision not yet made. Neither is mistaken. Their disagreement is not about facts they have failed to gather. It is about a now that, across the elsewhere, simply does not exist as a single shared thing. What does it mean that the direction of an idle walk can shuffle, by days, which distant events you count as happening right now? Taken at face value, it seems to say something staggering about the future. And here is where physics hands the microphone to philosophy, and where we must be careful to present the argument exactly, without yet judging it. A line of reasoning developed by the physicist C.W. Rietdijk in 1966 and the philosopher Hilary-Putnam in 1967 in a paper titled Time and Physical Geometry, takes the relativity of distant simultaneity and draws a sweeping conclusion. The argument runs roughly like this. Whatever is real and present for me now includes whatever is simultaneous with me now. For the slow walker, a certain event at Andromeda is present, and so, the argument says, real. But that same event is in the future for the other walker. If it is real for one, and they are both equally valid observers, then the future event must be, in some sense, already real, already out there, fixed, waiting. Extend the logic across the whole elsewhere of every observer, and you arrive at a picture in which the future is as settled and as existent as the past. The flowing present is an illusion. All of space-time simply is, laid out complete. Every event eternally in its place. This is the picture often called the block universe. Proponents of this view press it toward conclusions about time itself. The question, does time exist in this framework, gets a deflationary answer. Not as a flowing river, not as a special present moving from past to future, but only as a static dimension of a four-dimensional block, no more passing than the dimension of space passes. Philosophers formalize the divide as two opposed positions. The A theory holds that the flow of time and the special status of now are real, objective features of the world. The B theory holds that they are not, that the only real temporal facts are tenseless relations of earlier than and later than, and that the sense of a moving present is a feature of consciousness, not of the cosmos. The relativity of simultaneity and the absolute elsewhere that displays it most starkly are taken by many to press hard toward the B theory, toward the block, toward the conclusion that becoming and passage are stories we tell rather than facts we find. It would be easy, and it would be a mistake, to present that conclusion as a settled deliverance of physics. It is not, and the most rigorous voices in the field say so plainly. The philosopher Howard Stein, in an influential analysis, pointed out that the inference from Minkowski geometry to the block universe smuggles in an assumption the geometry does not contain. Relativity gives you an invariant causal structure. The cones, the three regions, the protected order of causes. What it does not hand you is an invariant notion of the present stretching across space, because, as we have seen, no such thing exists in the geometry. So when the Rietdijk-Putnam argument moves from simultaneous with me to real, it is leaning on exactly the frame-dependent observer-relative simultaneity that relativity has just told us is not a fact about the world. Stein argued that the relation Minkowski spacetime actually delivers as invariant is not a global now at all, but the relation between an event and the events in or on its past light cone, the things that have genuinely become settled for it. On that reading, the only rigorous present of an event is, in the strict sense, the event itself, together with its causal past. Whether that is metaphysically satisfying is a further question, but it shows that the leap from the geometry of the elsewhere to the future is already real and time does not exist is a philosophical addition, not a theorem. We will return to this, because it is the hinge on which the entire final part of this exploration will turn. There is a second place where the elsewhere tempts a dramatic conclusion, and it comes from quantum mechanics. When two particles are quantum entangled and then separated, a measurement on one appears to instantly fix the state of the other. And crucially, this correlation persists even when the two measurements are made in each other's absolute elsewhere, space-like separated, too far apart in too little time for any light-speed signal to coordinate them. This sounds at first like a violation of everything we have just built. It sounds like information leaping across the sealed gap, like the elsewhere being breached. The most careful modern experiments were designed precisely to test it under the strictest conditions. In 2015, two landmark loophole-free experiments, one led by Lynden Shalm and his collaborators, another by Marissa Giustina and hers, confirmed that these quantum correlations are real, deliberately arranging the measurements to be space-like separated so that no ordinary signal could explain the results. The correlations are genuine. They are not classical. They unsettle our intuitions about how separated parts of the world can be related. It is worth understanding why those experiments were built the way they were, because the design is a monument to taking the elsewhere seriously. The deep question, sharpened by the physicist John Bell, was whether the correlations between entangled particles could be explained by ordinary means, by the particles carrying, from the moment they were created, a shared set of hidden instructions that simply determined their later behavior, with no spooky connection at all. Bell proved something extraordinary, that any such local, common cause explanation must obey a precise mathematical limit, an inequality, on how strongly the distant measurements can be correlated. Quantum mechanics predicts that entangled particles violate that limit. So the question became experimental. Do real particles obey Bell's bound, vindicating ordinary local explanation, or do they break it, confirming the genuinely non-classical connection? But there was a loophole. If any signal, travelling at or below the speed of light, could have passed between the two measurement stations during the experiment, coordinating, however subtly, what was measured and what came out, then a clever local explanation could sneak back in. The only way to slam that loophole shut is to make the two measurements, including the very choice of what to measure at each station, happen in each other's absolute elsewhere, space-like separated, too far apart in too little time for any light-speed signal to connect them. That is precisely what the landmark experiments of 2015 achieved. The teams led by Lynden Shalm and by Marissa Giustina, working independently, arranged their detectors far enough apart and their measurement choices fast enough that each station's setting and result lay outside the other's light cone. No signal at or below C could have carried the news from one to the other in time. And under those airtight, space-like separated conditions, the particles still violated Bell's inequality. The correlations are real, and they cannot be explained by any prearranged local instructions, because the geometry itself guaranteed the two events could not have conspired. This is the absolute elsewhere put to work as a laboratory tool. The experimenters used the causal sealing of the space-like region as the very thing that makes the result airtight. The conclusion is that the quantum world contains connections across the elsewhere that are not classical, not reducible to signals, not explicable by anything passing through the cones. And yet, this is the essential point, and it must be stated with care, the very same physics that confirms the correlations forbids them from carrying a message. The result is called the no signaling theorem, or the no communication theorem, And reviews by physicists such as Asher Perez and Daniel Turno state it precisely. Relativity places severe restrictions on information transfer between distant systems, and entanglement by itself cannot be used to send any controllable signal faster than light. When you measure your entangled particle, you get a random outcome. The distant partner's outcome is correlated with yours, but the person there sees only their own random result and learns nothing until a slower-than-light message, travelling honestly through the cones, tells them what you got. The correlation is real, the communication is impossible. The elsewhere is not breached. The causal walls hold. Nature performs a remarkable balancing act here. It permits a deep, non-classical connection across the space-like gap, while withholding any means to exploit that connection to break the speed limit or send influence into the sealed region. Quantum mechanics makes the elsewhere stranger. It does not make it reachable. It is worth stating, plainly and without ornament, what the deflationary reading actually proposes. Because the question, does time exist, is one the brief for this exploration asks directly. On the B theory, the tenseless view, time does exist, but not as anything that flows. It exists the way a length exists, as a dimension, a direction within the block, along which events are ordered by the tenseless relations of earlier than and later than. There is no privileged moment called now that is metaphysically lit up while the others sit in darkness. Every moment is equally real, equally present to itself, and the impression that one special moment is happening while the rest are gone or not yet is, on this account, a feature of how conscious creatures are embedded in the block, not a feature of the block itself. The proponents of this view hold that the relativity of simultaneity, and above all the absolute elsewhere, make the tensed alternative untenable, because a flowing universal present would need exactly the frame-independent now that the elsewhere proves does not exist. So past and future events on this telling are as real as present ones. The dinosaurs and your final hour are not gone and not pending, but simply located elsewhere along the time dimension, no less real for not being here. Set against this is the dynamic view, the A theory, which holds that the passage of time and the privilege of the present are not illusions of perspective, but the deepest facts there are. That the world genuinely becomes, that the future is open and the past settled, and that any physics which cannot find passage has simply not captured everything that is real. And between the two stands a more careful position, the one Howard Stein staked out, and the one the Stanford Encyclopedia's treatment of being and becoming in modern physics presents at length, that relativity neither proves nor refutes passage in general, but does constrain what a defensible notion of becoming can look like. On Stein's reading, the only becoming relation that respects the invariant structure is one tied to an event's own past light cone, a local, point-by-point becoming, not a global advancing now. Whether that thin, geometric becoming is enough to satisfy our sense that time really passes is left genuinely open. The honest summary, the one the research keeps returning to, is that the geometry does not decide the metaphysics. It rules some pictures out and leaves several standing. The block is permitted by the physics. It is not delivered by it. Keep that distinction sharp. In the final part, it will do the heaviest lifting of all. So here is where the neutral presentation leaves us, with the full landscape laid out and not one conclusion yet forced. Special relativity carves reality into absolute past, absolute future, and the absolute elsewhere, the vast, causally severed majority. The causal structure is invariant and protects cause and effect with perfect strictness. But across the elsewhere, there is no shared present. The very pastness, presentness, and futureness of a distant event depends on the motion of the one asking. From this, some build the block universe and conclude that time does not flow and the future is already real, though the most rigorous analyses warn that this conclusion is read into the geometry, not out of it. And quantum entanglement reaches across the elsewhere with correlations that astonish, yet cannot send a single bit of information through the wall. Threaded through all of it is one stubborn fact we have circled again and again and will now finally confront. Nowhere in this physics, not in any frame, not for any observer, not for any device, is there a vantage that holds all of reality in a single present. Every observer is trapped inside their own cones, with almost the whole universe sealed in an elsewhere whose now they cannot even define. In the final part, we stop laying out the geometry and start asking what it means. We ask what the elsewhere actually proves about time, about freedom, about the self, and what it quietly points toward, standing as it does outside every cone that any creature could ever occupy. For 2 parts, I have laid out the geometry and refused to judge it. I showed you the light cone and the 3 regions it carves. I showed you that the absolute elsewhere is the causally severed majority of reality, and that across it the word now loses any fixed meaning. I gave the block universe argument its strongest voice. Let it conclude that the future is already real and time does not flow, and presented the quantum correlations that reach across the sealed gap. I debunked nothing. That was deliberate. Now we examine. Now we ask what this physics actually proves, and where it stops being physics and starts being something else wearing the prestige of physics. Begin with the distinction the research itself insists upon, because everything turns on it. There is what relativity firmly establishes, and there is what gets read into it. What relativity firmly establishes is the invariant causal structure. The cones are real, the 3 regions are absolute, cause and effect are protected, and there is no observer-independent present stretching across the elsewhere. That is secure. It is confirmed in the geometry and in the laboratory. But notice what that secure result is about. It is about causal reachability and the failure of distant simultaneity. It is not, by itself, a statement that time is unreal, that the future is fixed, that you have no freedom, that there is no soul, or that there is no creator. Each of those is a further claim, and the entire anti-theistic reading of the absolute elsewhere consists in treating the further claims as though the geometry had delivered them. It did not. The most rigorous analysts in the field, the ones who built and scrutinized this very structure, say so directly. Take the first and grandest claim, that because there is no objective universal now, there is no shared reality. The present is an illusion, and any notion of a single vantage that sees what is happening across the cosmos is incoherent. So much the worse for a God who is supposed to behold all things. Stated at full strength, the relativity of simultaneity, displayed most starkly in the elsewhere, really does seem to abolish the cosmic present. No observer anywhere can define a now that spans the causally disconnected gaps. Examine the claim and watch where it actually points. Every step of that argument is about observers inside space-time, observers riding world lines, moving at some velocity less than light, trapped within their own cones, with almost the whole universe sealed in an elsewhere whose now they cannot even fix. The conclusion is correct. No such observer can hold all of reality in a single present. But that is not an argument against a vantage outside the cones. It is the most precise argument for one that physics has ever produced. Here is the inversion, and it is the heart of this episode. Classical theism never placed the cause of the universe on a world line. The first cause is not a fast-moving observer, not a creature drifting at some fraction of light speed, not a thing inside space and time bound by the speed limit c. It is, by the oldest definition reasoned toward, eternal and non-spatial, outside the manifold entirely. And the absolute elsewhere is precisely the discovery that for everything inside the manifold, the whole can never be gathered into one present. The geometry builds a reality in which no internal point of view can ever see all at once. It thereby marks out, with mathematical exactness, the one standpoint from which the absolute past, the absolute future, and the absolute elsewhere of every event could be beheld together. The standpoint that is on no world line, in no cone, at no velocity, because it is not within the fabric at all. The physics does not abolish the God's eye view. It demonstrates that the God's eye view is the only view that could ever unify what the universe is built to keep no creature from unifying. What does it mean that reality is structured so that no one inside it can ever witness the whole? That the totality is, in principle, visible only from outside time? At minimum, it means the elsewhere is no argument against a transcendent vantage. Followed honestly, it is a signpost toward one. Now the second claim, the one that frightens people most, that the block universe is real, the future already fixed, and therefore your freedom is an illusion, and your choices were settled before you made them. Give it its full hearing. Serious thinkers have drawn exactly this conclusion from the relativity of simultaneity. And then bring to bear what the research has already told us on the authority of the field's most careful voices. The block conclusion is not a theorem of the geometry. Howard Stein showed that the argument smuggles in the very thing relativity denies, an observer-independent present, and then launders frame relative simultaneity into what is real. Strip out the smuggled premise, and the invariant structure relativity actually delivers is the causal cone, with the only rigorous relation of having become running along an event's past light cone. The future is not handed to you as fixed. It is added by a philosopher's assumption that the geometry refuses to underwrite. But there is a sharper blade here, one specific to this topic, and it cuts the fatalist argument off at the root. Every bit of the strangeness the block argument feeds on lives in the elsewhere, the space-like region, the causally disconnected gaps. That is the only place where temporal order goes frame relative. Now ask the decisive question: where does your agency live? Your deliberations, your actions, their consequences. They unfold along time-like chains, cause flowing to effect, inside your future light cone. And we proved in the second part that time-like order is invariant. Every observer agrees on it. No change of motion can reverse it. The one region of reality relevant to your freedom, your causal future, the events you can actually shape, is exactly the region relativity refuses to make frame relative. The fatalist takes the genuine shock of the elsewhere, a place you can never act upon and never reach, and illegitimately smuggles it into your causal future, which it never touched. The frame dependence is real, but it is quarantined precisely where it cannot bear on choice. Freedom does not live in the elsewhere. It lives in the cones, where order is absolute. This argument fails not because we wish it to, but because it transfers a property of the unreachable region onto the one region the geometry holds fixed. And suppose, for the sake of argument, one still insists the block is real, and the whole of space-time simply exists. Even then, the anti-theistic conclusion does not follow, for a reason that turns the argument inside out. A four-dimensional whole, every event eternally in its place, every cross-section laid out from end to end, is not a thing that explains itself. A complete and ordered totality cries out for its source more loudly than an unfinished one, not less. If the universe is a block, then the block is the artifact. And an artifact of that scale and that precision, laid out whole, structured by invariant laws holding identically in every frame, is exactly the kind of thing that points beyond itself to a cause that configured it. The fatalist reaches for the block to retire the creator, and instead hands him the finished canvas. The third claim is the boldest and the most self-defeating, that Minkowski's geometry proves time does not exist, that passage is pure illusion. The researcher's own summary of the misconceptions states the correction flatly. The geometry establishes a Lorentzian causal structure, and nothing in it entails that temporal passage is unreal. Those are metaphysical claims that go beyond the mathematics. But there is a deeper problem, and it is fatal in the strict sense. Follow what you did to reach the conclusion time does not pass. You held a premise. Then you drew an inference. Then you arrived at the conclusion. That is a sequence, a before and an after in your own thinking, a passage from not yet understanding to understanding. Reasoning is itself a temporal act. An argument whose conclusion is there is no real passage can only be believed by passing through the very thing it denies. You cannot reason your way to the unreality of the sequence that reasoning is made of. The experience of passage is not a stray illusion to be explained away. It is the precondition of explaining anything at all. Consider too what the universe does at the quantum edge of the elsewhere, because it reveals a consistency too pointed to ignore. Entanglement permits a real, non-classical connection across the space-like gap. And the no-signaling theorem forbids that connection from ever carrying a message that would break the causal order. The 2015 loophole-free experiments confirmed the correlations while the speed limit stood untouched. Notice what kind of universe this is. It is one in which cause and effect are protected for every observer, in every frame, automatically by an invariant speed limit, and in which even the strangest, most non-local phenomenon we know is permitted to astonish us while being forbidden to contradict that order. This is not the signature of chaos. A reality that guards the consistency of cause and effect across its entire causally disconnected majority, that closes every loophole before it can open, exhibits exactly the deep, rational, law-like coherence that points to a single ordering mind rather than to accident. The materialist must take this consistency as a brute, unexplained given. The theist has a name for why the universe refuses to contradict itself. And there is one last remainder, the one the geometry can never absorb, and it is closest of all to you. Physics has told us there is no shared cosmic now, no preferred present anywhere in the four-dimensional block. And yet, you have one. Right now, undeniably, you are experiencing a single, unified present, a moment in which your awareness is gathered, more certain to you than any equation. That present is real. You live in it. But it corresponds to nothing in the geometry. The block has no privileged now for your consciousness to be occupying. So where does it come from? The unified, subjective present, the standing now of the experiencing self, is an explanatory remainder that a frame-relative, block-universe physics cannot locate, cannot produce, and cannot explain away, because the explaining is done from within it. Matter, sliced into space-like and time-like relations, has no present. You do. That unbridgeable gap between a physics with no now and a consciousness that is nothing but now is not a small puzzle. It is a signpost pointing past the world line toward a self that is more than its coordinates and a source that is more than the block. There is a further cost the block and no-flow picture quietly incurs, and it is moral. If the whole of space-time simply
exists, every slice equally real and none privileged, and if the self is merely a world line with no genuine becoming, then the ground beneath moral responsibility begins to erode. Why hold the person sitting here now answerable for a deed done by an earlier segment of the world line, if no segment is more real or more present than another? And if the future in which judgment falls was already fixed and waiting? Follow that thought consistently and desert guilt, praise, and obligation thin into bookkeeping about a static structure. But notice what no one actually does. No one lives this way. Not the physicist, not the philosopher who defends the block over coffee, not the most committed materialist. Every one of them deliberates as though the future were open, keeps promises as though the self who made them still stands, and burns with genuine indignation at injustice, as though right and wrong were real and binding on a self that endures to be bound. The universal human refusal to actually live as the block would require is not a failure of nerve, it is evidence. Evidence that the open future and the responsible, enduring self are not illusions we could discard if we were braver, but bedrock features of reality that even their deniers cannot stop standing on. And there is a question the deflationary view cannot answer. The kind of question that is worth asking precisely because the silence that follows is so total. If every moment of your life is equally real, laid out in the block with no privileged present, then tell me, why are you experiencing this one? Why is your awareness here, now, on this particular slice of your world line, reading these words, rather than at your first birthday, or your last hour, or smeared with equal dimness across the whole of it? The block has no answer. It contains no mechanism to single out a present, because its entire claim is that no present is singled out. Yet your consciousness is undeniably located, pinned to a single advancing now that the physics says should not exist. The materialist can describe the world line in full and never once explain why there is a lit window moving along it, a place where it is now for you. That lit window, the moving, unified, first-person present, is the one phenomenon most certain in all of experience and most absent from the entire four-dimensional description. What does it mean that the thing you are surest of, your own present moment, is the very thing the physics cannot find? It means the self that experiences is not exhausted by the world line it experiences, and a present that the geometry cannot supply must be supplied by something the geometry does not contain. Let the cascade settle. The absence of a cosmic present
does not abolish the God's eye view. It isolates it as the only view that could see the whole. The block universe does not abolish your freedom. The frame dependence it exploits is quarantined in the elsewhere, while your agency runs along the invariant causal order. The claim that time is unreal cannot be reasoned to without using the passage it denies. The consistency that protects causality across the entire elsewhere is the fingerprint of order, not accident. And the unified present of your own consciousness is precisely the now that the physics says exists nowhere. And yet here you are, inside it. 5 anti-theistic extrapolations, each reaching past what the geometry permits, each collapsing back when the smuggled premise is exposed. I want to be fair to the honest impulse on the other side, because some who hold it are sincere, and the tone here is reserved for arguments, never for people. The impulse says, give physics time and it will close these gaps. The soul, the creator, the flowing present are placeholders for ignorance. But hear what the relevant science says about itself. The research that grounds this very episode is scrupulous to mark its limits. That the leap from geometry to metaphysics is an addition. That Stein's caution stands. That the misconceptions are misconceptions. The confident anti-theistic conclusion does not follow from the physics. It outruns the physics by the physics's own admission. And a conclusion that outruns its evidence is not science. It is a faith, pointed as it happens, away from where the evidence actually leads. It is worth naming the ancient idea that all of this circles back to, because the convergence is striking. Long before relativity, oldest theology did not picture the eternal cause as a being who has simply lasted a very long time, enduring moment after moment as we do, only without end. It pictured eternity as something else entirely. Not endless time, but the whole of time held at once. A single, undivided present in which past, present and future are all immediately beheld together by a cause that does not stand at any moment because it stands outside the sequence of moments altogether. For centuries, that was a purely philosophical claim, an inference about what a timeless first cause would have to be like. And then physics, pursuing the geometry of light, arrived at a picture that rhymes with it astonishingly. The block universe says all moments are equally real, laid out together, no one of them privileged as the present. The skeptic hears in this the death of the now, and therefore, supposedly, the death of God. But listen to what the picture actually echoes. A reality in which all events exist together, beheld as a whole rather than experienced one slice at a time, is precisely the reality as it would appear from the vantage of the eternal present that classical theism described from reason alone. Where the skeptic says all moments are equally real and so there is no now, the theist answers, there is a now, the eternal one, and it belongs to the one outside the cones, in whom the past, the future, and the absolute elsewhere of every event are all present at once. Your own fleeting present, the lit window moving along your world line, is not an embarrassment to be explained away. It is a small, created participation in that eternal present, a finite echo inside time of the vantage that holds all of time outside it. Let me offer one image to gather all of this, because the elsewhere lends itself to a comparison that exposes the central mistake. Picture reality as a library of unimaginable size. Every event that ever happens, a volume on its shelves. Now picture the observers, every conscious creature, every instrument, as readers moving through it. Here is the law of this library, written into its architecture. Each reader can only ever open the books within their own light cone, the volumes of their settled past and their reachable future. And the endless stacks beyond, the absolute elsewhere, hold books they can see exist but can never open, can never read, can never even agree with another reader about whether those books are being written now or were finished long ago. No reader, however they move, however fast, can survey the library entire. The collection is built so that no one inside it ever holds the whole. And from this, the skeptic concludes, therefore there is no librarian, no author, no mind behind the collection. But turn the inference over and feel how backward it runs. A library no reader can ever survey in full is not evidence against a librarian. It is the strongest possible case for one, for a vantage that is not a reader at all, not moving through the stacks at some velocity, not bound by the rule that seals the elsewhere, but standing outside the architecture, holding every volume of past and future and elsewhere open at once. The unreachability of the whole from inside does not banish the author. It defines the one place the author would have to stand. And consider what kind of library it is. Not a chaos of pages, but a collection governed, in every aisle and every reader's hands, by laws of breathtaking consistency. A single invariant speed, the same for every reader in the cosmos, holds the whole structure together, and guarantees that no two readers will ever find their causes and effects in contradictory order. The most exotic phenomenon in the building, the quantum correlation that reaches across the sealed stacks, is permitted to astonish, but forbidden to carry a forbidden message. Nowhere does the architecture allow a contradiction. Everywhere it protects the coherence of cause and effect with a strictness no reader imposed and no reader can break. This is the part that stays with me when the equations are set down. It is not the strangeness of the elsewhere that is hardest to explain on the assumption of blind accident. It is the discipline, the fact that a universe with no shared present nonetheless refuses, invariantly and universally, to let its causal order fall into contradiction. Order of that depth, holding without exception across a reality most of which no one can reach, is the signature we everywhere else recognize as the mark of a mind. The materialist must call it a brute fact and move on. The theist can say why a created order would be, above all, coherent, because it proceeds from a single, rational source. What does it mean that the universe will surrender the cosmic now, surrender distant simultaneity, surrender almost everything to the relativity of motion, but will not, under any circumstance, surrender the consistency of cause and effect? It means that consistency is not negotiable, and a non-negotiable, universe-spanning consistency is not what randomness produces. It is what authorship leaves behind. And the deeper you look, the harder the coincidence becomes to dismiss. A cosmos that surrenders the universal present without a struggle, yet defends the order of cause and effect to the very last, looks less like an accident that merely happens to be consistent, and more like a work that was made to cohere. Let me bring this exploration to a close. We began by drawing a map of a life inside space-time and discovering that most of it is sealed away in a third region. We followed Einstein's invariant light speed and Minkowski's 1908 geometry to the light cone, and the light cone to the three realms: absolute past, absolute future, and the absolute elsewhere, the causally severed majority where now dissolves into the motion of the observer. We let the block universe make its case and the quantum correlations make theirs. And then we examined and found at every turn that the physics establishes something precise and modest, while the sweeping verdicts about time, freedom, the self, and God were added afterward and could not bear the weight. The elsewhere does not erase the creator. It marks the one vantage outside every cone from which alone the whole could be seen. The block does not erase your freedom, which lives in the invariant order of cause and effect. The geometry does not abolish time's passage, which you must use even to deny it. And the unified present you cannot find anywhere in the physics is shining right now behind your eyes. Followed honestly, the silence of the absolute elsewhere does not lead to emptiness. It leads to the one who stands outside it. If you found value in this exploration, consider subscribing. It helps these deep dives reach more curious minds. Tonight, when you look up, remember that almost everything you can see is sitting in your absolute elsewhere, real, present in its own right, and forever beyond your reach, with no shared now between you and it. No observer in all the universe can gather it into a single present. That no creature can hold the whole at once is not a wall against meaning. It is the shape of a truth older than the geometry, that only the one who stands outside of time beholds the past, the future, and the elsewhere of everything together in a single eternal present. You are inside the cones, he is not. Sleep well, knowing the whole is held, just not by anyone who must measure it from within. Good night.